Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello everyone. Welcome back to my housing studies lecture. Today I'm going to repost my previous lectures on housing delivery system, which was the week 8 lecture. I have to apologize to you because I have made a mistake in using the formula. Therefore, if you have already downloaded my previous lectures, the week 8, please do not use it. Okay, now I'm going to start my PowerPoint presentation. Okay, this is my slides. So what is housing delivery system? Housing delivery system is a system that informs us the approach an institutions or the government entities use to deliver housing to the targeted populations. Basically, housing delivery can be approached from two different sides. The first one is demand sides, and the second one is supply sides, as you see in these pictures. Demand sides is looking at the real figure of what the people wants. I use the analogy of a cup of coffee. When we make a cup of coffee, we will adjust the volume and flavor of the coffee according to our taste. In the field of housing studies, this can be seen in the case of self-help housing, which actually contributes most of the housing stock in Indonesia. However, it is very difficult and quite complicated to get the figure of housing demand for setting up the general policies on housing delivery. Therefore, the authority often use the second approach, which is the supply-oriented approach, the approach from supply sides. I have also made an analogy of coffee pot. When we fill up a coffee pot, we do not know exactly how many cups we can serve. We can only assume. This is the approach that we are going to focus on today. So, supply sides will determine the housing need, calculated using the arithmetic methods. And you see demand is not the same as needs. Okay, let us explore more on arithmetic method. The methods is used to calculate housing needs at various scale, municipals, regionals, or nationals. We often call it macro level. And this method is utilized for developing the housing policies, housing delivery strategy, and perhaps long or short-term development strategy. To be able to use these methods, we need some information related to first population number, and then population growth and number of families. Then information on housing stock and its quality, and then information on density, either density of housing and family densities, and then assumptions of the ideal conditions. So this is the formula to calculate the housing needs. Housing needs is equal to housing shortage plus additional housing needs. Housing needs is basically the number of new houses needed in a specified location. And housing shortage is the number of houses based on the number of people who have no access to housing. And additional housing needs is the number of houses as a response to certain conditions, like for instance natural growth and damage of the building. Okay, so the calculation of housing shortage is based on the number of occupied house that exceeds the ideal condition, or the ideal assumptions. So it is important to set up the ideal assumptions. For instance, one family occupies one house, or occupation rate is equal to 5 persons. Occupation rates means the inhabitants of the house, the ideal number of people who are supposed to live in one house. Then factors affecting additional housing. For instance, the natural population growth, house depreciations, the house that needs to be repaired, and then migrations, and impact of natural disaster. Here is the formula of housing shortage. So basically, you need to get the information from the census on the number of residents in the year of calculations, and also the number of houses in the year of calculations. Now, IO, as I mentioned previously, is the average number of family per house in the year of calculation. This is also based, of course, from the observations or survey. And then I is the ideal number of family. So you have to set up the ideal number of family that acceptable living in one house. For instance, as I mentioned previously, one family per one house, or the ideal number of inhabitants or occupation rate per house. So in this case, you don't look at the number of family, but the number of people, the ideal number of people who supposed to live in one house. Right. So to understand the formula, we need to do this exercise. This is the first exercise. I call it family-based. It means that if you look back at the formula, the IO and I is based on the number of family that live in one house. Okay, let's go back to the exercise page. As you see here, the census shows that the number of house in the district in Jogja is 20,000, and in average each of these house is inhabited by 3 families. We set up the ideal number of family per house is 1, and now you have to calculate the housing shortage in that district. And here's the answer. Every part of this formula is already included in the question, so you can just use that parts and then calculate according to this formula. And the result is, as seen in this page, is 13,333. Okay, now let's move to the exercise 2. Similar to exercise 1, this one is based on the housing occupancy. It means that regardless the number of the family, we only look at the number of people who live in one house. So we have the similar number of the same number, of the house, which is 20,000. And there is additional information, which is the number of populations is 100,000. And we set up the ideal number of inhabitants per house is 4. And you are asked to calculate the housing shortage in that district. This is the result. There's one part of the formula that you need to figure out, which is IO, because it is not described in the questions. So the formula for IO is, as seen in this page, is PO divided by HO. So in this case, it's equal to 5. Now, once you find the number of IO, you can just follow the formula of calculating the housing shortage. And as seen in this page, it's equal to 4,000. Okay, after we calculate the housing shortage, the next step that we have to do is to calculate the additional housing needs. And the first factor that we have to find out is the natural growth factor, which is the additional housing needs as a result of natural growth, growth of the populations. And this is the formula. What we have to calculate is number of population in a certain year. For instance, in the next 10 years, in the year of 2030, we need to know the number of current populations and also the ratio of population growth per year and the difference of number of year. For instance, if we want to calculate the population in 2030, then the difference is 10. Now, once the number of population is defined, then we can calculate additional housing needs using this formula. The HTP is equal to PN divided by I, right? HTP is number of houses needed as a result of natural population growth. I, as we have discussed previously, is the ideal occupation rate. And then PN is the number of populations in certain year. To understand the concepts, let us do the exercise 3 based on the previous exercise, which is exercise 2. At this case, the percentage of population increase is 2% per year, and the question is to calculate the housing needs in 2030. And this is the result. So we first calculate the population growth, and then once we got it, we can then calculate HTP, which is the additional housing needs due to population growth. And the result, as seen in this page, is 30,475. So if we refer to the exercise 2, then we can decide, or we can find the housing needs in the next 10 years is 4,000 plus 30,475. So it's 34,475. The next factor that we need to consider is depreciation factor. This factor will result in a decision whether we have to replace the house or not. And this is the formula. We know the number of populations and the number of house occupancy, IO, and what we have to find out is the number of house that needs to be repaired. So we need to get the information about the expected maximum age of the house. Once we set the expected maximum age of the house, then we can calculate the number of house that needs repair. And the next factor is the relocations or migration factor. This is the formula. Basically, we have to find out the number of migrations, and we have to calculate the number of populations in a certain year, and then expected of ratio population increase in urban area, and then a ratio of population increase within 1 year. Once we get the NM, then we can calculate the HTP as shown in the previous slides. So we modify the formula. The HTP is equal to NM divided by I. Then the change of density of occupancy can also increase and or decrease the number of houses. And this is the formula to determine the change of density. Then once we got the HA, which is the net increase, then we can calculate the housing shortage using this information. So we use the formula of housing shortage to figure out the change of density of occupancy. Right, so to conclude, based on the previous discussion, we can see that the formula to calculate the housing needs is housing needs, HN, is equal to housing shortage plus additional housing needs, right? Housing shortage, we know it's HHO, and then additional housing needs is HTP plus HTT and plus other factors. I think that's all, and this is the exercise for the homework. I already uploaded the slides in the Google Classroom, so you can do the exercise, but I have already or find the answer, and this is the answer of the exercise. I don't do the description of each part, so I would like you to find out the elaboration of each formula by yourself. I think that's all. Thank you very much for your attention, and we'll see you again in the next lecture. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.